In a world where talent knows no color, why does prejudice still cast the first shadow? Have you ever wondered how far one person's cruelty can go before karma steps in? What happens when someone in power abuses their position to shame and humiliate another human being simply because of the color of their skin? Today, we're diving into a story that will shock you, anger you, and ultimately leave you rooting for justice. This is the story of a black actor who faced public humiliation on set, only for karma to set things straight in the most unexpected way. But before we get into how it all unfolded, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this. Now let's dive in. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. Every eye on the set was fixed on the casting director, a middle-aged woman named Linda Harper, who stood in the center of the room, her face twisted in a sneer. In front of her stood Marcus Johnson, a talented black actor in his late 20s, his shoulders slumped, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and humiliation. "You think you're good enough for this role?" Linda spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're not even close. You're here because we needed to fill a quota, not because you have what it takes. Honestly, I don't know why you even bother." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating everyone in the room. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his composure. He had worked tirelessly for this opportunity, pouring his heart and soul into his craft. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the venom in Linda's voice, the way she looked at him like he was nothing more than a stain on her pristine set. The other crew members shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others exchanging uneasy glances. No one dared to speak up. Linda was known for her sharp tongue and even sharper temper, and no one wanted to risk their job by defending Marcus. But then, something unexpected happened. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and looked Linda straight in the eye. "You can say whatever you want about me," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "But you can't take away my talent. And you can't take away my dignity." Linda's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it looked like she was about to say something even worse. But before she could, the director, a man named Greg Thompson, stepped forward. "That's enough, Linda," he said firmly. "We're here to make a movie, not to tear people down." Linda shot Greg a glare, but said nothing. She turned on her heel and stormed off the set, leaving Marcus standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was still silent, but now it was a different kind of silence, one filled with tension and unspoken questions. What would happen next? Would Marcus walk away? Would Linda face any consequences for her actions? But before anyone could say or do anything, the lights on the set flickered and then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, a loud crash echoed through the room, followed by a scream. What just happened? Who screamed? And what does this mean for Marcus and Linda? Let's rewind a bit and see how we got here. Marcus Johnson had always dreamed of being an actor. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, he spent hours watching movies, studying the performances of his favorite actors, and practicing his craft in front of the mirror. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Hollywood wasn't exactly known for its diversity, but he was determined to make it. After years of hard work, Marcus finally landed his big break, a supporting role in a major Hollywood film. It wasn't the lead, but it was a significant part, and Marcus was thrilled. He poured everything he had into preparing for the role, spending countless hours rehearsing, researching, and perfecting his performance. But from the moment he arrived on set, something felt off. Linda Harper, the casting director, seemed to have it out for him. She would make snide comments under her breath, roll her eyes whenever he spoke, and generally treat him with a level of disrespect that was hard to ignore. At first, Marcus tried to brush it off. He told himself that she was just tough, that she treated everyone the same way. But deep down, he knew the truth. Linda didn't like him because of the color of his skin. The tension came to a head during a rehearsal for a key scene. Marcus had been practicing his lines all morning, and he was feeling confident. But as soon as he started delivering his lines, Linda interrupted him. "Stop, stop, stop," she shouted, throwing her hands up in frustration. "What are you even doing?" That's not how the character is supposed to sound. You're completely missing the mark. Marcus blinked, confused. I'm sorry, I thought. You thought wrong, Linda snapped. This character is supposed to be strong, confident, not whatever it is you're doing. Do you even understand the material? Marcus felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. I've been studying the script for weeks, he said evenly. I know this character inside and out. Maybe if you gave me some constructive feedback instead of just tearing me down, I could— Don't you dare talk back to me, Linda hissed, cutting him off. You're lucky to even be here. Do you know how many actors would kill for this role? And yet here you are, wasting everyone's time with your mediocre performance. That's when the room fell silent, and the confrontation escalated to the point where Linda publicly shamed Marcus in front of the entire crew. But now, as the lights flickered and the room was plunged into darkness, something strange was happening. The scream that echoed through the room wasn't just any scream, it was Linda's. And when the lights came back on, everyone was in for a shock. Linda was lying on the floor, clutching her ankle, her face twisted in pain. The heavy light fixture that had been hanging above her had come crashing down, narrowly missing her head but landing on her foot. The crew rushed to her side, but Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. Was this just a freak accident? Or was it something more? As the chaos unfolded, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something had shifted on the set, and nothing would ever be the same again. But what happens next? Will Linda's injury change the dynamics on set? Will Marcus finally get the respect he deserves? Or is this just the first twist in a much larger story? Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning. The set was in chaos. Crew members scrambled to help Linda, who was now sitting on the floor, her face pale and sweaty as she clutched her injured ankle. The heavy light fixture that had fallen lay beside her, a stark reminder of how close she had come to something far worse. Paramedics were called, and the production was put on hold as everyone tried to make sense of what had just happened. Marcus stood off to the side, his mind racing. He didn't know what to feel: relief, guilt, confusion. Part of him wanted to believe that this was some kind of cosmic justice, that Linda's cruelty had finally caught up with her. But another part of him felt uneasy. He didn't wish harm on anyone, not even Linda. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. As the paramedics loaded Linda into an ambulance, Greg, the director, pulled Marcus aside. You okay? He asked, his voice low and concerned. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. Yeah, I'm fine. Just shaken, I guess. Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know things have been tough with Linda. She's not the easiest person to work with. But this is something else. I don't know what's going on, but I want you to know that I've got your back. Okay. Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he couldn't help but wonder if Greg's support would mean anything in the long run. Linda had a lot of power in the industry, and if she decided to make things difficult for him, there wasn't much Greg could do to protect him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. With Linda gone, the set felt different, lighter somehow. But there was also an undercurrent of tension, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marcus tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the incident. Had the light fixture falling really been an accident? Or was it something more? That night, Marcus went home exhausted, but unable to sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts swirling. He thought about everything he had been through to get to this point, the auditions, the rejections, the countless hours of practice. He thought about the way Linda had treated him, the way she had tried to make him feel small and insignificant. And he thought about the look on her face when the light fixture came crashing down. The next morning, Marcus arrived on set early, hoping to get a head start on the day. But as soon as he walked in, he could tell something was wrong. The crew was gathered in a huddle, whispering amongst themselves. When they saw Marcus, they fell silent, their eyes darting away as if they were hiding something. What's going on? Marcus asked, his heart sinking. One of the crew members, a young woman named Sarah, stepped forward. It's Linda, she said hesitantly. She's saying the light fixture didn't just fall. She's saying someone tampered with it. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What? That's crazy. Why would anyone do that? Sarah shrugged, but her eyes were filled with unease. I don't know. But she's pointing fingers, and well, you were there. You saw how she treated you. People are starting to talk. Marcus's stomach churned. He knew exactly what Sarah was implying, that Linda was trying to blame him for what had happened. It was ridiculous, of course. He would never do something like that. But in an industry where perception was everything, even the baseless accusation could ruin his career. Before Marcus could respond, Greg walked in, his face grim. "Marcus, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his tone serious. Marcus followed Greg to his office, his heart pounding. He had a bad feeling about this. "Listen," Greg said once they were alone, "I don't believe for a second that you had anything to do with what happened to Linda. But she's making a lot of noise, and the studio is getting nervous. They want to do an investigation." Marcus felt like the walls were closing in around him. "An investigation? For what? I didn't do anything." "I know that," Greg said quickly. "And I'll do everything I can to make sure this doesn't blow up. But until this is resolved, things are going to be tense. I need you to stay focused, okay? Don't let this distract you from your work." Marcus nodded, but inside, he was seething. How could Linda do this? How could she twist something so clearly accidental into an attack on him? It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. As the day went on, the tension on set only grew. Marcus could feel the eyes of the crew on him, watching, judging. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his scenes, but it was hard. Every time he delivered a line, he wondered if people were thinking about Linda's accusations. Every time he interacted with the crew, he wondered if they believed him. By the end of the day, Marcus was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He just wanted to go home, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the set. But as he was packing up his things, Sarah approached him again. "Hey," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I believe you. I don't think you had anything to do with what happened to Linda. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people here are on your side." Marcus felt a small flicker of hope. "Thanks," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." Sarah smiled, but there was something in her eyes, something she wasn't saying. "Just be careful, okay? Linda's not going to let this go. And if she can't prove you did anything, she'll find another way to make your life difficult." Marcus nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. Sarah was right. Linda wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. As he left the set that night, Marcus couldn't help but feel like he was walking into a storm. The investigation, the whispers, the tension, it was all building to something big, and he had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain, this was far from over. The investigation into the fallen light fixture began the next day. A team of safety inspectors arrived on set, their presence casting a shadow over the already tense atmosphere. Marcus tried to keep his head down, focusing on his scenes and avoiding the whispers that seemed to follow him everywhere. But it was impossible to ignore the way people looked at him, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Linda, meanwhile, was making her presence felt even from her hospital bed. She had been released after treatment for her injured ankle, but she was far from silent. Through phone calls and emails, she continued to push the narrative that the incident had been no accident. She didn't outright accuse Marcus, but her implications were clear enough. The studio, eager to avoid a scandal, was taking her claims seriously. Marcus felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. He had worked so hard to get here, and now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. He tried to remind himself that he hadn't done anything wrong, but the weight of the accusations was crushing. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. All he could do was wait and hope that the truth would come out. But then, something unexpected happened. During a routine inspection of the set, one of the safety inspectors discovered something unusual. The bolts that had held the light fixture in place had been tampered with, not just loosened, but deliberately weakened. It was clear that someone had wanted the fixture to fall. The discovery sent shockwaves through the set, and the whispers grew louder. If someone had sabotaged the light, who was it, and why? Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. If the investigators could prove that the fixture had been tampered with, maybe they could also prove that he had nothing to do with it. But that hope was short-lived. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the studio was more interested in protecting itself than in finding the truth. The safety inspectors were pulled off the case, and the official story became that the incident had been a tragic accident caused by faulty equipment. Marcus was furious. He knew that wasn't the whole story, but there was nothing he could do. The studio had spoken, and that was that. The investigation was closed and life on set went on, but the damage had been done. The whispers didn't stop, and neither did Linda's campaign against him. One afternoon, as Marcus was rehearsing a scene, he overheard a conversation between two crew members. They didn't realize he was within earshot, and their words cut him to the core. "I don't know," one of them said. "I mean, it's weird, right? The light falls, Linda gets hurt, and now Marcus is acting all innocent. But what if he's not? What if he's just really good at hiding it?" "I don't know," the other replied. "But Linda's convinced he did it, and she's not the type to let something like this go. If she says he's guilty, I'm inclined to believe her." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He wanted to confront them, to scream that he hadn't done anything wrong. But he knew it wouldn't do any good. The rumors were out there, and there was no taking them back. That night, Marcus went home feeling more defeated than ever. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, wondering how things had gone so wrong. He had always believed that if he worked hard and stayed true to himself, he would succeed. But now it felt like the world was against him. Just as he was about to give in to despair, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it and read the message. "I know what really happened on set. Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. at the coffee shop on 5th and Main. Come alone." Marcus's heart raced. Who was this? What did they know? Was this a trap? Or was it the break he'd been waiting for? He didn't know, but he couldn't ignore it. He had to find out. The next day, Marcus arrived at the coffee shop early, his nerves on edge. He ordered a coffee and sat at a corner table, his eyes darting to the door every time it opened. Finally, at exactly 8 p.m., a woman walked in. She was in her mid-30s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She scanned the room, spotted Marcus, and walked over to his table. "Marcus Johnson?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Who are you?" "My name is Rachel," she said, sitting down across from him. "I'm a freelance journalist, and I think I can help you." Marcus frowned. "Help me with what?" Rachel leaned in, her voice low. "I've been looking into what happened on your set. The fallen light fixture, Linda's accusations, the studio's cover-up. And I think there's more to this story than anyone realizes." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Rachel hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. "Let's just say I've been digging into Linda's past. And what I've found, well, let's just say it's not pretty. She's got a history of this kind of behavior, targeting people, ruining careers. But this time, she may have gone too far." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Do you think you can prove it?" Rachel smiled. "I don't just think I can. I know I can. But I need your help. Are you willing to go on the record? To tell your side of the story?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes. Whatever it takes." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "Good. Because this isn't just about you, Marcus. This is about holding people like Linda accountable. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you've been through." As Marcus left the coffee shop that night, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he had a chance to fight back. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. If Rachel was right, and Linda had a history of this kind of behavior, then exposing her wouldn't be easy. It would be dangerous even, but Marcus was ready. He had been pushed to his limit, and now it was time to push back. The next few days were a whirlwind. Marcus and Rachel worked tirelessly, piecing together the story of Linda's past. It wasn't easy. Linda had been careful to cover her tracks, and many of the people she had targeted were too afraid to speak out. But slowly, they began to uncover a pattern of behavior that was impossible to ignore. They found former colleagues who had been pushed out of jobs after clashing with Linda. They found actors whose careers had been derailed by her harsh criticisms and baseless accusations. And they found evidence that Linda had a history of using her power to silence anyone who dared to challenge her. But the most shocking discovery came when they uncovered a series of emails between Linda and a high-ranking studio executive. In the emails, Linda bragged about her ability to handle difficult actors and crew members, even suggesting that she had orchestrated the downfall of several people who had crossed her. It was damning evidence, and it confirmed what Marcus had suspected all along. Linda was a bully who used her position to intimidate and control others. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a fierce determination to see justice done. But he also knew that going public with this information would be risky. Linda was powerful, and she had friends in high places. If they weren't careful, she could turn the tables on them and make Marcus out to be the villain. Rachel, however, was undeterred. "We've got her," she said confidently as they reviewed the evidence one evening. "This is bigger than just you, Marcus. This is about exposing a systemic problem in the industry. If we do this right, we can make sure that no one else has to go through what you've been through." Marcus nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. What if she retaliates? What if she tries to ruin me even more? Rachel's expression softened. "I won't lie to you, Marcus. There's always a risk when you take on someone like Linda. But if we don't do something, she'll just keep doing this to other people. And you'll always wonder what might have happened if you'd stood up to her." Marcus knew she was right. He couldn't let Linda win. Not after everything she had put him through. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it." The next day, Rachel published her article. It was a bombshell, a detailed expose of Linda's behavior, complete with quotes from former colleagues, actors, and crew members, as well as the incriminating emails. The article went viral within hours, sparking a firestorm of controversy in the industry. The reaction was immediate and intense. Social media was flooded with posts from people sharing their own experiences with Linda and others like her. The hashtag Time's Up for Linda began trending, and calls for accountability grew louder by the hour. Linda, of course, denied everything. She issued a statement calling the article a baseless attack and accusing Rachel and Marcus of trying to destroy her career. But the evidence was too strong, and the public outcry was too loud. Within days, the studio announced that Linda had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet victory. He was relieved that Linda was finally being held accountable, but he also knew that the fight wasn't over. The industry was still deeply flawed, and there were plenty of other people like Linda who needed to be exposed. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel proud of what he had accomplished. But just as he was starting to feel like things might finally be turning around, he received another text from an unknown number. This one was short and to the point. "You think you've won? Think again. This isn't over." Marcus's heart sank. He didn't know who had sent the message, but he had a pretty good idea. Linda wasn't going to go down without a fight, and she wasn't the only one who had something to lose if the truth came out. As he stared at the message, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. The battle with Linda had exposed a much larger war, one that would take everything he had to win. The text message lingered in Marcus's mind like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over his hard-won victory. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just an empty threat, but deep down, he knew better. Linda wasn't the type to back down, and whoever had sent that message, whether it was her or someone else, wasn't done with him. The fallout from Rachel's article continued to ripple through the industry. More people came forward with stories about Linda, and the studio's investigation into her conduct expanded. But as the days passed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes on set. Crew members who had once been friendly now avoided him, their eyes darting away when he walked by. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. One afternoon, as Marcus was rehearsing a scene, Greg pulled him aside. The director's face was grim, and Marcus could tell something was wrong. "We need to talk," Greg said, his voice low. In private, Marcus followed Greg to his office, his stomach churning with dread. He had a feeling he knew what this was about. Once they were alone, Greg closed the door and turned to face Marcus. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you," he said. "The studio's getting nervous. This whole thing with Linda, it's causing a lot of problems. And some people are starting to wonder if it's worth keeping you on the project." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What? Why? I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that," Greg said quickly. "And I've been fighting for you, Marcus. But the studio's worried about the negative attention. They think having you on the project might complicate things." Marcus stared at Greg, his mind racing. "So what are you saying? Are they firing me?" Greg sighed. running a hand through his hair. Not yet, but they're considering it. And if they do decide to let you go, there's not much I can do to stop them. Marcus felt a surge of anger. This is insane. I'm the one who was wronged here. Linda's the one who should be fired, not me. I know, Greg said, his voice filled with frustration. But this industry, it's not fair, Marcus. You know that as well as anyone. And right now, the studio's more concerned about protecting its image than doing the right thing. Marcus clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check. So, what am I supposed to do? Just sit back and let them ruin my career? Greg hesitated, then leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Listen, there's something else you should know. I've been hearing rumors, whispers that Linda's been reaching out to some powerful people. People who don't want this story to get any bigger. If she's really trying to take you down, she's not going to do it alone. Marcus's heart sank. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still a blow. What kind of people are we talking about? Greg shook his head. I don't know for sure. But if I were you, I'd be careful. Very careful. The warning hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Marcus left Greg's office feeling more lost than ever. He had thought that exposing Linda would bring him some measure of justice. But instead, it felt like he was sinking deeper into a pit of uncertainty and fear. That night, Marcus went home and tried to distract himself by reading through the script for the next day's scenes. But his mind kept drifting back to Greg's words. Who were these powerful people Linda was working with? And what were they planning to do to him? As he was about to give up and go to bed, his phone buzzed. It was another text from an unknown number. This one was even more chilling than the last. You should have stayed quiet. Now you'll pay the price. Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He didn't know who was sending these messages, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't bluffing. The next morning, Marcus arrived on set determined to stay focused. He couldn't let the threats and the rumors distract him from his work. But as soon as he walked in, he could tell something was wrong. The crew was gathered in a huddle, their faces tense and serious. When they saw Marcus, they fell silent, their eyes filled with unease. What's going on? Marcus asked, his heart pounding. One of the crew members, a man named Tom, stepped forward. There's been an accident, he said hesitantly. On the set, someone tampered with the equipment. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of equipment? Tom hesitated, then said, the rigging for the stunt scene. It was supposed to be safe, but someone cut the wires. If the stunt coordinator hadn't noticed, someone could have been seriously hurt, or worse. Marcus's stomach churned. He knew exactly what this meant. Someone was trying to send a message, and that message was clear. They were willing to hurt people to get what they wanted. As the crew scrambled to assess the damage and tighten security, Marcus felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just about him anymore. Whoever was behind this was willing to put everyone on set at risk. And if they were willing to go this far, what would they do next? Marcus knew he couldn't stay silent. He had to do something, but what? He was just one person, up against forces he didn't fully understand. And with the studio already considering cutting him loose, he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. But as he stood there, surrounded by the chaos of the set, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let them win. No matter what it took, he was going to fight back. The sabotage on set sent shockwaves through the production. The studio immediately launched an internal investigation, but Marcus knew better than to expect any real answers. Whoever was behind this was too smart to leave a trail. The message was clear. They could strike at any time, and no one was safe. Marcus spent the next few days on edge, his nerves frayed and his mind racing. He tried to focus on his work, but it was impossible to ignore the tension that hung over the set like a dark cloud. The crew was jumpy, and even Greg seemed more distant than usual. Marcus could feel the walls closing in, and he knew he had to do something before it was too late. He reached out to Rachel, hoping she might have some insight into what was going on. They met at the same coffee shop where they had first spoken, and Marcus wasted no time getting to the point. Someone's trying to scare me off, he said, his voice low and urgent. They sabotaged the stunt rigging, and they've been sending me threatening texts. I don't know who's behind it, but I know it's connected to Linda. I need your help. Rachel listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each word. When Marcus finished, she leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed in thought. "This is bigger than I thought," she said finally. "If they're willing to go this far, it means they're desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. So what do I do?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I can't just sit back and let them destroy my career. Or worse." Rachel hesitated, then leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone you should talk to. A friend of mine, an investigative journalist named David Carter. He's been digging into corruption in the industry for years. If anyone can help you, it's him." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Can you set up a meeting?" Rachel nodded. "I'll reach out to him. But Marcus, you need to be careful. If they're watching you, and I think they are, they'll notice if you start poking around. You can't let them know what you're doing." Marcus understood the risk, but he also knew he didn't have a choice. He couldn't let whoever was behind this win. Not after everything they had put him through. The meeting with David Carter was arranged for the following evening. Marcus arrived at a nondescript office building in downtown Los Angeles, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear. David was waiting for him in a small, dimly lit room filled with stacks of papers and files. He was a tall, wiry man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Rachel told me about your situation," David said as they shook hands. "Sounds like you've got yourself in the middle of something ugly." "That's one way to put it," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. David gestured for Marcus to sit, then leaned back in his chair, studying him intently. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Marcus did as he was told, recounting the events of the past few weeks in detail. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Marcus finished, David leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "This isn't just about Linda," he said finally. "She's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole network of people in this industry who protect each other, no matter what. And if you're threatening their power, they'll do whatever it takes to shut you down." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "So what do I do? How do I fight back?" David's lips curled into a grim smile. "You don't fight them head on. You outsmart them. You find their weaknesses, their secrets, and you expose them. But you have to be careful. One wrong move, and they'll crush you." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "Do you think you can help me?" David hesitated, then said, "I'll do what I can. But this isn't going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. You're going to have to trust me, and you're going to have to be patient." Marcus agreed, though he wasn't sure how much patience he had left. He was tired of living in fear, tired of feeling like he was constantly looking over his shoulder. But he also knew that David was his best chance at uncovering the truth. Over the next few days, David began digging into the connections between Linda and the powerful figures in the industry. He uncovered a web of favors, payoffs, and cover-ups that stretched far beyond what Marcus had imagined. It was a dangerous game, and every step brought them closer to the truth and closer to danger. One evening, as Marcus was leaving the set, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and he couldn't see inside, but he had a sinking feeling that he was being watched. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding as he made his way to his car. Just as he was about to unlock the door, his phone buzzed. It was another text from an unknown number. "You're playing with fire. Stop now, or you'll get burned." Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He knew the threat was real, but he also knew he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when he was so close. The next day, David called him with news. "I've found something," he said, his voice tense with excitement. "Something big, but we need to meet in person." "It's not safe to talk about this over the phone." Marcus agreed, and they arranged to meet at a secluded park later that evening. As he drove to the meeting spot, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He kept checking his rearview mirror, but the streets were quiet, and he saw no sign of the black SUV. When he arrived at the park, David was waiting for him on a bench, a thick folder in his hands. He handed it to Marcus without a word, his expression grim. "What is this?" Marcus asked, flipping through the pages. "Evidence," David replied. "Emails, bank records, photos, everything you need to expose the people behind this." "But Marcus, if you go public with this, there's no turning back. They'll come after you with everything they've got. Marcus felt a surge of determination. I don't care. I'm done running. I'm done being afraid. David nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Then it's your call. But whatever you do, be careful. These people don't play fair. As Marcus left the park that night, the folder tucked securely under his arm, he felt a strange sense of calm. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control. He had the evidence he needed to fight back, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. But as he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And when he pulled into his driveway, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The front door of his house was wide open. Marcus's heart pounded as he stared at the open door of his house. His mind raced with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Were they still inside? He hesitated, unsure of what to do. Calling the police seemed like the logical choice. But what if this was connected to everything else? What if the people behind the threats were sending him another message? Taking a deep breath, Marcus reached for his phone and dialed David's number. The journalist picked up on the second ring. "David, it's Marcus," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I think someone's been in my house. The door's wide open, and I don't know if they're still inside." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then David's voice came through, calm but serious. "Don't go in. Stay where you are. I'm on my way." Marcus waited in his car, his eyes glued to the house. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made him jump. It felt like an eternity before David's car pulled up behind him. The journalist got out and approached Marcus's window, his expression grim. "You okay?" David asked. Marcus nodded, though he was far from okay. "Yeah, I don't know what to do." David glanced at the house, then back at Marcus. "Stay here. I'll check it out." Before Marcus could protest, David was already walking toward the house. Marcus watched as the journalist cautiously stepped inside, his heart in his throat. A few minutes later, David reappeared in the doorway and waved Marcus over. "It's clear," David said as Marcus approached. "But you're not going to like what I found." Marcus stepped inside, his stomach churning. The house was a mess. Drawers pulled open, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had been searching for something. "They were looking for the folder," David said, his voice low. "They must have known you had it." Marcus felt a surge of panic. "But I had it with me. What if they come back? What if they—" David cut him off with a raised hand. "We need to get you out of here. Somewhere safe. And we need to move fast." Marcus didn't argue. He grabbed a few essentials, clothes, his laptop, the folder, and followed David to his car. As they drove away from the house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black SUV following them. David took him to a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of the city. "This is a safe house," he explained as they entered. "No one knows about it. You'll be safe here for now." Marcus nodded, though he didn't feel safe at all. The events of the past few days had left him feeling raw and exposed, like a target painted on his back. Over the next few hours, David helped Marcus go through the folder, organizing the evidence and planning their next steps. It was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the corruption they were uncovering was staggering. But Marcus knew they couldn't stop now. They had come too far to turn back. As they worked, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Marcus showed the message to David, who frowned. "It could be a trap," he said, "or it could be legitimate. Either way, we need to be careful." Marcus agreed, but he also knew he couldn't ignore Greg. The director had been one of the few people on his side throughout this whole ordeal. If Greg said it was urgent, it probably was. They arranged to meet at a public cafe the next morning. David insisted on coming with Marcus, both for protection and to help assess the situation. When they arrived, Greg was already there, sitting at a corner table with a worried expression. "Marcus," Greg said as they approached. "Thanks for coming. And who's this?" "This is David Carter," Marcus said, gesturing to the journalist. "He's helping me with everything." Greg nodded, though he looked uneasy. "I see. Well, I'll get straight to the point. The studio's planning to cut you from the project. They're going to announce it tomorrow." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "What? Why?" Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. They're scared, Marcus. Scared of the backlash, scared of the attention. They think letting you go will make the whole thing go away. Marcus clenched his fists, his anger bubbling to the surface. That's not fair. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, Greg said quickly. And I've been fighting for you, but there's only so much I can do. The studios made up their mind. Marcus felt a surge of frustration. But before he could respond, David spoke up. What if we gave them a reason to change their minds? Greg frowned. What do you mean? David leaned in closer, his voice low. We have evidence, hard evidence, of corruption and misconduct involving some of the studio's top executives. If we go public with it, the studio will have bigger problems to worry about than Marcus's role in the project. Greg's eyes widened. You're talking about blackmail? I'm talking about leverage, David corrected. We're not asking for money or favors. We're asking for fairness. For justice. Greg hesitated, his expression conflicted. This is dangerous, Marcus. If you go down this road, there's no turning back. Marcus looked at Greg, then at David. He knew they were right, this was dangerous. But he also knew he couldn't let the studio silence him. Not after everything he had been through. I'm done playing by their rules, Marcus said firmly. If this is what it takes to fight back, then I'm in. Greg sighed, but he didn't argue. All right, but be careful. And if you need anything, let me know. As Marcus and David left the cafe, Marcus felt a strange sense of resolve. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control. He had the evidence, he had allies, and he had a plan. But as they walked to the car, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Parked across the street was a black SUV, its windows tinted and its engine idling. They were being watched. The sight of the black SUV sent a jolt of fear through Marcus. He grabbed David's arm and nodded toward the vehicle. That's them, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They've been following me. David's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the SUV. Stay calm, he said quietly. Don't let them know you've seen them. Let's get to the car. They walked briskly, but casually to David's car, trying not to draw attention to themselves. Marcus could feel the weight of the SUV's presence like a physical force, but he forced himself not to look back. Once they were inside the car, David started the engine and pulled away from the curb. Do you think they'll follow us? Marcus asked, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Probably, David replied, his tone grim. But we'll lose them. I know this city better than they do. David drove with practiced ease, weaving through side streets and alleys until they were sure they had shaken the tail. Marcus's heart was still racing, but he felt a small measure of relief as they put distance between themselves and the SUV. We need to move fast, David said as they drove. If they're watching you this closely, it means they're getting desperate. We can't afford to wait any longer. Marcus nodded, though his mind was still reeling. What's the plan? David glanced at him, his expression serious. We go public. Tonight. We release the evidence and let the world see what's really going on. But we need to be smart about it. We'll reach out to a few trusted journalists and media outlets, people who can't be bought or intimidated. Once the story's out, there's no taking it back. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He knew this was the right move, but the thought of exposing everything and the backlash that would surely follow was terrifying. Still, he didn't see any other way. All right, he said finally. Let's do it. They spent the rest of the day preparing. David reached out to his contacts, setting up a series of meetings with journalists and editors. Marcus helped organize the evidence, making sure everything was clear and compelling. By the time evening rolled around, they were ready. The first meeting was with a veteran reporter named Sarah Bennett, who worked for a major news outlet. She listened intently as David and Marcus laid out the evidence, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. This is explosive, she said when they finished. If this is all true, it could bring down some very powerful people. It's true, David said firmly. Every word of it. Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. Then we'll run with it. But we need to move quickly. If they catch wind of what we're doing, they'll try to shut us down. The next few hours were a blur. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to verify the evidence and prepare the story for publication. Marcus and David stayed close, answering questions and providing additional context where needed. It was exhausting, but Marcus felt a strange sense of exhilaration. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was fighting back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced by the industry's corruption. Finally, just after midnight, the story went live. It was a bombshell, a detailed exposé of the corruption, favoritism, and abuse of power that had been allowed to fester in the industry for years. The evidence was damning, and the names involved were some of the most powerful in Hollywood. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage, and the story quickly went viral. Within hours, it was the top trending topic on every platform. People were calling for accountability, for justice, for change. Marcus watched it all unfold from the safety of the apartment, his emotions a tangled mix of relief, fear, and hope. He knew this was just the beginning, that the fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right side of history. But as the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see the black SUV parked outside. He knew the people they had exposed wouldn't take this lying down. They would fight back, and they would fight dirty. Just as he was about to voice his concerns to David, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that. Now you'll see what happens to people who cross us." Marcus's heart sank. He showed the message to David, who frowned. "They're trying to scare you," David said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "But they're too late. The story's out. There's nothing they can do to stop it now." Marcus wanted to believe him, but the knot of fear in his stomach wouldn't go away. He knew the people they had exposed were dangerous, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had silenced him permanently. As the night stretched on, Marcus tried to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was racing, his thoughts a jumble of fear and determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. But as he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The morning after the story broke, the world was in an uproar. News outlets everywhere were running with the exposé, and the names of powerful industry figures were splashed across headlines. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #HollywoodExposed and #TimesUpForReal, and people everywhere were demanding accountability. Marcus woke up to a flood of messages, some supportive, others threatening. He tried to focus on the positive, but the threats weighed heavily on his mind. David assured him that they were just empty words, meant to intimidate him, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. As the day went on, the backlash against the exposed figures grew stronger. Several high-profile executives and producers were forced to step down, and the studio Marcus had been working for issued a public apology, promising to clean house and implement new policies to prevent future abuses. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Despite the progress, Marcus couldn't relax. He knew the people they had exposed were dangerous, and he knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. He spent the day in the safe house with David, monitoring the news and planning their next steps. They knew they had to stay vigilant, that the people they had exposed would do whatever it took to silence them. That evening, as they were going over the latest developments, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Marcus Johnson?" a voice on the other end said. It was deep and authoritative, but Marcus didn't recognize it. "Who is this?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. "My name is Agent Harris," the voice replied. "I'm with the FBI. We've been monitoring the situation, and we'd like to speak with you." "It's urgent." Marcus's mind raced. The FBI? What did they want with him? He glanced at David, who was watching him intently. "What's this about?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We have reason to believe your life may be in danger," Agent Harris said. "We need to get you to a secure location. Can you meet us?" Marcus hesitated, unsure of what to do. He didn't know if he could trust this person, but the thought of being in danger wasn't exactly new to him. I need to think about it," Marcus said finally. "There's no time to think," Agent Harris replied, his voice urgent. "If you want to stay alive, you need to come with us. Now." Marcus looked at David, who nodded. Ask where they want to meet, David whispered. Where? Marcus asked. Agent Harris gave him an address, a location not far from the safe house. Marcus repeated it to David, who quickly pulled up the location on his laptop. It's a federal building, David said quietly. It checks out. Marcus took a deep breath, then said, All right, I'll be there. He hung up and looked at David. What do you think? David frowned. It could be legit, but it could also be a trap. We need to be careful. Marcus nodded. What should I do? David thought for a moment, then said, I'll go with you. We'll scope it out first. If it looks safe, you can go in. If not, we'll get out of there. They drove to the location, a nondescript office building in a quiet part of the city. As they approached, Marcus's nerves were on edge. He kept glancing around, half expecting to see the black SUV or some other sign of danger. When they arrived, they parked a short distance away and watched the building for a few minutes. Everything seemed normal. No suspicious vehicles, no unusual activity. Finally, David nodded. It looks clean, he said, but stay alert. If anything feels off, we're out of there. They walked to the building and were met at the door by a man in a suit who identified himself as Agent Harris. He led them inside to a small, windowless room where two other agents were waiting. Thank you for coming, Agent Harris said as they sat down. We know you've been through a lot, but we need your help. The people you've exposed are connected to some very dangerous individuals. We've been investigating them for years, but we've never had enough evidence to take them down. Until now. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. So you're going after them? Agent Harris nodded. We are, but we need your cooperation. We need you to testify, to tell your story in court. It's the only way we can make sure they're held accountable. Marcus hesitated. Testifying would mean putting himself even further in the line of fire. But it would also mean a chance at real justice, not just for him, but for everyone who had been hurt by these people. I'll do it, Marcus said finally. But I need protection. These people, they've already tried to hurt me. If they find out I'm testifying, they'll come after me. Agent Harris nodded. We'll put you in protective custody. You'll be safe. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. It's going to be a long process, and it's going to be dangerous. But if you're willing to see it through, we can make sure these people never hurt anyone again. Marcus looked at David, who gave him a reassuring nod. I'm in, Marcus said firmly. Whatever it takes. The agent spent the next hour going over the details of the case and what Marcus's testimony would entail. By the time they finished, Marcus felt both exhausted and energized. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. As they left the building, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. He had allies, he had a plan, and he had a chance to make a real difference. But as they walked to the car, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Parked across the street was the black SUV, its windows tinted and its engine idling. They were being watched. The sight of the black SUV sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He grabbed David's arm and nodded toward the vehicle. They're here, he said, his voice tense. They've been following me. David's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the SUV. Stay calm, he said quietly. Let's get to the car. We'll deal with this. They walked briskly to David's car, trying not to draw attention to themselves. Marcus could feel the weight of the SUV's presence like a physical force, but he forced himself not to look back. Once they were inside the car, David started the engine and pulled away from the curb. Do you think they'll follow us? Marcus asked, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Probably, David replied, his tone grim. But we'll lose them. I know this city better than they do. David drove with practiced ease, weaving through side streets and alleys until they were sure they had shaken the tail. Marcus's heart was still racing, but he felt a small measure of relief as they put distance between themselves and the SUV. We need to get you to a secure location, David said as they drove. If they're watching you this closely, it means they're getting desperate. We can't afford to take any chances. Marcus nodded, though his mind was still reeling. What about the FBI? They said they'd put me in protective custody. David frowned. I don't trust them. Not completely. We need to make sure you're safe before we involve anyone else. They drove to a remote safe house outside the city, a place David had used before for high-profile cases. It was a small, unassuming cabin surrounded by dense woods, far from prying eyes. As they pulled up to the cabin, Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. They spent the next few days laying low, monitoring the news, and planning their next steps. The fallout from the exposé continued to grow, with more and more people coming forward with their own stories of abuse and corruption. It felt like a turning point, like the industry was finally being forced to confront its darkest secrets. But Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. The people they had exposed were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. He spent his days preparing for his testimony, going over the evidence with David and the FBI agents who visited the cabin. It was exhausting, but he knew it was necessary. One evening, as they were going over the latest developments, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you're safe?" "Think again." Marcus felt a surge of fear. He showed the message to David, who frowned. "They're trying to scare you," David said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "But they're too late. The story's out. There's nothing they can do to stop it now." Marcus wanted to believe him, but the knot of fear in his stomach wouldn't go away. He knew the people they had exposed were dangerous, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had silenced him, permanently. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. He froze, his heart pounding. David was already awake, his expression tense. "Stay here," David whispered, grabbing a flashlight and moving toward the door. Marcus watched as David cautiously opened the door and stepped outside. A few moments later, he heard voices, David's and someone else's. His mind raced with possibilities. Were they under attack? Had the people they had exposed found them? After what felt like an eternity, David returned, his expression grim. "It's the FBI," he said. "They're here to take you to a secure location. They say it's not safe here anymore." Marcus felt a surge of relief, but also fear. "What do you think?" David hesitated, then nodded. "I think we should go. If they've found us, it's only a matter of time before they try something." They packed quickly and followed the agents to a waiting car. As they drove away from the cabin, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the black SUV following them. The secure location turned out to be a heavily guarded federal facility deep in the mountains. It was a far cry from the cabin, with high walls, security cameras, and armed guards at every entrance. Marcus felt a strange mix of safety and confinement as they were led inside. Over the next few weeks, Marcus prepared for his testimony. It was a grueling process, but he knew it was necessary. The trial was set to begin soon, and the world was watching. Marcus knew this was his chance to make a difference, to ensure that the people who had hurt so many would finally be held accountable. The day of the trial arrived, and Marcus felt a mix of nerves and determination as he took the stand. He told his story, laying bare the corruption and abuse he had witnessed. It was painful, but it was also cathartic. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was fighting back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced. The trial lasted for weeks, with more and more evidence coming to light. In the end, the verdict was clear. The defendants were found guilty on all counts. It was a historic moment, a turning point for the industry and for justice. As Marcus left the courthouse that day, he felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead would still be difficult. He knew that, but he also knew he had done the right thing. He had stood up to the powerful, and he had won. But as he walked to the waiting car, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Parked across the street was the black SUV, its windows tinted and its engine idling. They were still watching. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a long and grueling chapter in Marcus's life, but it also signaled the beginning of something new. The industry was forced to reckon with its systemic issues, and reforms began to take shape. Marcus's bravery in coming forward inspired others to share their stories, creating a wave of accountability that swept through Hollywood and beyond. Marcus, now a symbol of resilience and justice, found himself in high demand. He was approached for interviews, speaking engagements, and even offers to consult on projects aimed at promoting diversity and fairness in the industry. But despite the newfound attention, Marcus remained grounded. He knew the fight wasn't over, not for him, and not for the countless others who had suffered in silence. David continued to work alongside Marcus, helping him navigate the complexities of his new reality. The two had formed a strong bond, united by their shared mission to expose the truth and hold the powerful accountable. Together, they launched a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of abuse and discrimination in the entertainment industry. The organization quickly gained traction, becoming a beacon of hope for those who had long been ignored. But even as Marcus moved forward, the shadow of the black SUV lingered in his mind. He knew the people he had exposed still had allies, and he knew they wouldn't forget what he had done. The threats didn't stop entirely, but Marcus refused to let fear dictate his life. He had come too far to turn back now. One evening, as Marcus was preparing for a speaking event, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You may have won the battle, but the war isn't over." Marcus stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He knew the message was meant to intimidate him, but this time, it didn't work. He had faced his fears, stood up to the powerful, and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever came next, he was ready. He deleted the message and put his phone away. As he stepped onto the stage that night, the crowd erupted into applause. Marcus took a deep breath, smiled, and began to speak. "This isn't just my story," he said, his voice steady and strong. "This is our story, and together, we can make sure it has a happy ending." The audience cheered, and Marcus felt a surge of hope. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had allies, he had a purpose, and he had the courage to keep fighting. As he left the stage that night, Marcus glanced at the parking lot. For a moment, he thought he saw the black SUV parked in the distance. But when he looked again, it was gone. Marcus smiled. Whatever came next, he was ready. Marcus's story is a powerful reminder that standing up for what's right can change lives, and even an entire industry. But the fight for justice and equality is far from over. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the importance of speaking out, don't let it end here. Like this video if you believe in holding the powerful accountable. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and change. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know faced similar challenges? Let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can create a world where everyone has a voice and no one is silenced. Thank you for watching. And remember, the fight for justice begins with you.